Part of working with disasters and with emergencies and things like this is you deal with things when they're ongoing, and pretty much you'll answer any question somebody asks you. As long as somebody isn't asking you for specific details or private information about a client or something that's sensitive like that, any general question of what do I do if, you're pretty much going to answer, and nothing's really off limits. With that on note, someone asked me, hey, I'm worried about my mother being deported because of ICE in the United States. What do I do? Sure, let's have a crack at it. This is a conversation that I had yesterday. At the end of the conversation, the individual said, yeah, you know what, you put this up and protect my identity, but I'd be more than happy if you made a video out of this. And who am I to deny someone the opportunity for free content? So on that note, I'm going to break down basically how that conversation went. This is for this specific person, and give you kind of a look at how to apply what really is chapter 3 in the Continuity 101 book to a different real life situation, in this case on a very micro scale. So this person had the basic question of, I'm worried if my parent is going to be deported, what sort of action should I take? So this is a risk question. So keep in mind this is, we're looking at a risk. And then the specific question is something around loss of family member, okay? And this could be any sort of reason why you're losing a family member, really. Like you could apply this to a family member passing on, you could apply this to you going to a different stage of your life, moving out of the family home if you're younger, whatever. The loss of family member could be interpreted any number of ways. But really, with the sort of question they asked and what they were looking for, the risk matrix and that sort of process directly applied. If you're the type of person who's already seen some of the Continuity 101 videos and you've seen the risk matrix, a lot of this will be familiar. I'm going to do this fairly quickly, so I'm not going to over-explain everything. I'm not going to assume you know nothing about this. But even if you're someone who hasn't seen that before, I'm going to kind of hold your hand a bit along the process so that it's not completely foreign. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to do when you're trying to figure this out, and the first thing I did with them was trying to figure out what risks look like to them, because we're going to take this loss and apply it onto their given risk profile or the way they view the world. And this comes down to basically two things: how they view likelihood and how they view consequence when looking at negative events. So first we create, let's find my hand there. So first we're going to create likelihood. And then we're going to look at consequence over here. So we're going to look at consequence. And we're going to rate basically how bad something is on a scale from 0 to 5, which is what we did with them. You don't have to do 0 to 5. You could do 1 to 3. You could do 1 to 5. You could do 0 to 100, whatever. But we're going to create a scale so we can get a better understanding for what's high and what's low and etc. This will make more sense in a second if this is new for you. So we ended up doing 0 to 5. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then consequence, we had 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, in likelihood, they determined, so this is all like, you can be the person who's the expert in this, looking at all this, but you shouldn't be putting these in for them. They should be determining what these are, and then you can help sort of guide them to not making any great logical errors or so they don't run into a pitfall. But so likelihood for them, this was in years. So basically how often an event would be expected to happen in a given time. So if I expect something to happen, once a week or once a month or once a year or whatever, that's sort of how they thought about it. Now, initially, when they put these in, 1 would have been for them 3 to 5 years, and then 0 was 10 to 50. And I said, okay, well, what happens if something's once every 70 years? Is that like a super 0? And they said, no, that can just go forever. Okay, so it's 10 years to forever. And then, okay, but what if it's 7 years though? Because you said this is 3 to 5 years, and you said this is, 10 to infinity. So 7 is in between. So which one is it? And like, oh, well, no, that's a 1. I'm like, okay, so 1 is 3 to 7 years. Okay, what's 8 years now? Oh, well, that's a 1. Okay, well, so what's 9 years? Oh, well, that's a 1. Okay, what's 9.5? right? So you're trying to find out the exact breakpoint, and they ended up saying that their magic number was actually when it becomes a double digit. So they thought that 9 years was actually the breakpoint. So 0 ended up becoming 9 years to infinite, and 1 ended up becoming like 3 years to 9 years or something. I think there was some more debate on that, but basically you have to figure out what their breakpoints are in case you get some sort of middle thing that's in between the two, so you don't get overly confused. I'm just going to write in, because I have their sheets here, what they decided for each, and then we can look at it after. So consequence and likelihood. Now, this is how they view events in time. So if I was to say, okay, so we've mapped this out, how often does a hurricane happen in your neighborhood? And they say, well, once every 3 years. Okay, well, 3 years would magically be a 1 because it's between 2 years to 10 years. So it would be a 1 likelihood on their scale, 5 being most often, 0 being least often, right? So that's how they would kind of look at this. If I was to say, how often do you get an annoying call from a telemarketer? They might say once a week. So that would be in this 4 1 day to 1 month category. Same type of idea. It's just how they view likelihood of how often things happen. Consequence. Now, interestingly for this, I asked them what matters to them in terms of negative impact, and they can add as many things as they want here. So I went through, okay, we can look at emotional impact, because this is to an individual family member loss. We can look at financial impact. We can look at your like operational impact, your ability to do certain things, whatever. And they decided that consequence was purely financial. So in their mind, this was financial and financial only. I believe their phrasing was that everything fundamentally comes back to financial. So they view emotional impact as a financial cost. They viewed an operational impact of them being able to do or not do things as a financial cost. To them, everything is viewed through the lens of financial. How these are determined will very significantly inform what happens in the risk matrix at the end, right? So just keep that in mind, that this is how they're viewing this. Within that, their numbers here became what they considered to be basically no impact or negligible was $0 to $20. Now keep in mind, when you're making consequences in something like this, your 0 and your 5, your highest level and your lowest level, the lowest impact here of whatever the lower limit, this is an amount of impact, be it in money, health and safety damage, whatever. This is an amount that needs to be so low that you basically don't care. This amount exists so that when something is out of scope, you go, okay, whatever, I don't care. This is so small that it's just insignificant and you've moved on and you don't even you don't bother wasting any time. This is equivalent to Walmart or a very large big box retailer that's international caring about one individual incident of shoplifting for a single pack of bubble gum. They don't care. Now, if they were looking at all of the shoplifting of all the bubblegum globally, maybe, but one person stealing one pack of bubblegum, they don't care. It's too small, they're too big. So you want to have some sort of break point that is that don't care level. Conversely, you also want to have a break point for the apocalypse. You have a break point for this happens, I'm done. This happens, there's nothing I can do. It's throw hands up in the air, it's over. Now for this individual, that number was $10,000. That is a very, very low number. I'm just going to say that right now. I'm not going to throw any shade on this individual or anything, but the reality is that if your life is basically over, if you take a $10,000 hit, you do not have a lot of room for risk. That can happen very easily. For many people, that's loss of a vehicle and life's over. If this is your reality, there is a lot of stuff that you probably need to do to manage risk in North America. Like, I'm just going to say that in general. This is a very, very low number. Now, look, if you're if you're like I don't know why you would be, but hypothetically, if one was like an 8-year-old and they were living off of parents' allowance, and this is an insurmountable amount of money to them, well then sure, if they were somehow capable of receiving a $10,000 impact, that would sure be life-crushing to them. I get that, but for most adults with established careers, this is a very low number to be your apocalypse number. But whatever, that's what they were certain on, fair enough. Okay, and I I had some pushback when they gave me this, but they were certain and no problem. So whatever the individual that you're mapping says, that's what is true, fair enough. With that in mind, we then had the risk matrix. Risk matrix. Now, what we're concerned about is what box things end up in. What box the thing ends up in determines how bad the thing is, generally speaking. I'm going to make some notes for you for this. If something ends up in this yellow box, if something ends up here, it is zero consequence, effectively, okay? If it is here, you basically don't care. If something ends up this orange box, this rectangle here for 5, it is so significant that it basically obliterates you. A lot of the normal things that we would recommend become irrelevant because it's too big. So if something goes there or there, that is going to immediately happen. Now, we ask the person. So I know this was a lot of setup, but this is important because once this is built, then after they do this risk, they can just throw anything into this and find out how to make decisions. So all this setup is to answer one quick question. The answering of the question doesn't take long, but further questions, you can still use the model. So their model's been made. This has been constructed for them. I say, what is the financial impact? What is your financial consequence to your mother being taken by ICE? And they say, well, they think about it and they go, nothing actually. And I go, you're sure? And they go, yeah, no, there's actually, no, there's no difference in my finances whatsoever. And I go, so you're telling me it's in this box right here? Now, we discussed likelihood. He says that he thinks it's probably a 2 or a 3. He expects that, ICE may visit his home one time this year, and that he reasonably expects that if they do, they will take his mother. So, okay, fine. So for whatever reason, based on this likelihood, he assumes that it's somewhere in, the 2 to 3 section. But no, there's no impact financially. And I go, okay, well, if there's no impact financially, you don't do anything about it, because there's no impact. Why would you waste any time doing a bunch of complex risk controls for something with no impact? Now, after this, I then go back and I say, are you sure you don't want me to go work with you on adding emotional impacts or anything? It's purely financial? They're like, no, yeah, it's purely financial. And I go, okay, well then, you don't care if your mother gets taken by ICE. It's not relevant to you because it's zero impact, right? And he goes, yeah. And I go, okay, well, I guess you've made a decision. So in this particular instance, it didn't matter to this person if they thought that. Now, the reason for this, of course, I don't know if you didn't catch it, is because they viewed this entirely through the lens of financial impact. So while we ended up later exploring, what he would do if it happened, he has friends, places that he can live, and cousins and wherever else where where immigration isn't a concern for him, etc. Because of that, he had risk controls in place, but none of these things were relevant because from this person's perspective, there's no impact. Completely different situation. If somebody else had different inputs here and these were different down there, or if there was an impact, maybe they would have been put in a different section and then there would have been a different answer. But for this guy, do nothing. It happens. Move on, right? That's the thing. To explain this further for people that are interested, because this could have gone a very different way. There are 5 different sort of things that you can do when it comes to managing risks. Now, they're categories. I'll put them here because this example is no longer relevant because we found out what he's doing. So there are 5 different things that you can do. The first would be prevent. Second is mitigate. Third is prepare. Fourth is respond. Fifth is recover. Now, when you have a risk, these are the 5 categories of things that you can do. One of the great ways to use this is to figure out when a certain thing ends up in a certain box, what sort of solution should I target? Now, anytime that something ends up in this 0 section, This whole section is basically recover. This whole section is recover. The impact is so low that you basically will generally just assume the loss. One of the most popular recovery strategies, or one strategy you should always consider when recovery is the main focus, is just eating the hit, is just assuming the loss, because it doesn't make much sense if you're focused on this to spend a bunch of money or resources doing something preemptively when you just want to move on and focus on something that's more important. So if something ends up here, you're going into recovery generally. If something ends up here in the other extreme, you're generally focused on prevent or recover. The reason for that is because at this extreme, the impact is so large, you basically can't do anything about it. So you either have to make sure it doesn't happen, or you need to have an exit strategy where if it does happen, you have some way to move on because it's just obliterated you. An example for this would be if you ran a business and you have something that is so significant that when it hits you, you're just bankrupt. It's over. So for that, you would have a strategy on how to fold up the business and move on, basically. Now, you could look at maybe changing the risk so that it moves this way, so reducing the ability for it to hit you. That's possible, but generally when something hits here in a risk, there's nothing you can really do but prevent or recover, generally speaking. It depends. Sometimes mitigation can shift it, but usually this is a prevent recover situation. Other than that, within this grid, closer you get to each of these corners, the more you'll focus on one particular strategy. When you get closer to this top right corner, you're looking at mitigation. The further you get up here, the more you want to lessen the blow. By definition, stuff up here happens all the time and has high impact. So it's happening constantly and it has a really, really high impact. There's some prevention here too. You want to make sure that those impacts get lessened and lessened and lessened, or that this thing happens less and less and less. It's if you had a crisis happening every day, you want to do something directly to affect what is causing that crisis. You're usually talking about doing a specific mitigation thing directly targeting that particular hazard that's impacting you. Okay, so that's what that corner generally is. If you're down here, you're generally talking about preparedness or preparing for something. If something happens, basically never, but the impact is huge, you don't want to get surprised by it. So you want to have something in place so that you don't just get caught unaware completely, but you don't want to spend a whole bunch of money training people on doing something they don't do every day. It doesn't make much sense to have a rapid response team for something that happens once every 50 years. Why would you do that? That's like training your entire population on active shooters when they see active shooters once in their given community once every 50 years. It doesn't make sense. However, flip side, what if you have like police? So if you have something that happens all the time, but that is not a significant impact in comparison, so like a police officer doing their regular duties, you would be doing response. So it makes sense to train response for the SWAT team doing active shooter stuff because they do it all the time. SWAT is always responding to the active shooter. They're not doing it once every 50 years. But it doesn't make sense for you to necessarily do response for it. You probably want to have a plan. Difference. So if it's low impact, but it's high likelihood, you want to put response stuff in place. This is like for most people, we get an annoying phone call at work. What is the standard operating procedure for dealing with an annoying phone call? That kind of idea. Well, if it's really, really, really insignificant, it would just be whatever, move on. But if it's something that has some small impact, then it would go here. A lot of call centers end up in response for that. Down here, if we get to the very low likelihood and low impact, we're once again going to the good old recover. So we're going to be recovering down here. Now, if you have something that shows up in the middle, which two is it closest to? Over here, which two is it closest to? Over here, do a combination. It's the same type of idea of if you're kind of in between, do a mix. If you end up dead center somehow, in between, you end up doing a mix of all four. Sometimes managing risks gets complicated. But in general, the closer you get to one of these corners, the more this advice will potentially change. if the individual that was asking me this question and wanted this example of how to break down how to deal with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement for the United States, coming to take their mother away, wanted, had a different look at this. If it ended up over here, then we would have been having a very different conversation. Potentially one with me doing a bunch of legal caveats. It just depends. So, but in their case, it was right there and yep. So that was the thing. This has been a general breakdown of how to go through that specific risk. You can apply this to anything really, and it works. For many people, you may be dealing with very scary things, where ice coming for your parents might be scary to specific people in the United States right now. Hurricanes might be very scary to other people around the world. Typhoons might be scary to people in the southern hemisphere, particular places in the world that flood all the time. Same thing, scary stuff. There is a system that you can use to apply so that you have a way to think about and come to decisions on how to best address your problems. Yep. Gotta love risk matrices. Matrices? Something like that.